Hello there. Welcome to Hericom Media, the home of Kwedu Classics. Your story, our story. Today, the 23rd of August 2023, is a historic day in the history of Zimbabwe. We see Zimbabweans in the country go to vote in a watershed election to elect the country's president, as well as members of the Assembly, of the House of Assembly, and representatives of local authorities. Now, Zimbabwe has been holding elections consistently and continuously since attaining her independence in 1980. And for the past 43 years, we have seen the ruling ZANU-PF party being the dominant force in those elections until the year 2000, when we saw the emergence of the opposition movement for democratic change led by the late Morgan Tsvangirai. But now, in this year's election, we see the two main protagonists, that is 80-year-old veteran of the Liberation War movement, Emmerson Mnangagwa, battling 45-year-old lawyer and pastor, Nelson Chamisa. Now, our topic today is, as we go into this election, is Zimbabwe ready for change of leadership? Is Zimbabwe ready for change of leadership? Now, to help us analyze this topic and look at this election, we are joined by Australia-based historian, writer, and political analyst, Reason Wafaroa. Reason, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Harry, and thank you, viewers. It's an exciting topic. Is Zimbabwe ready for change of leadership? It's a wide topic. It's interesting, and we are doing this at a time where people are in the process of electing a leader on this day, the 23rd of August, 2023. Now, we have to look at a number of things. We have had elections since 1980, 1985, 1990, 1995, 1996, 2000, 2002, 2005, 2008, 2013, and 2018. And we have another election. So this is a country that has religiously gone to elections because we adopted the Westminster Foundation type of democracy. We adopted the capitalist kind of democracy given our colonial background. So in terms of the law, in terms of, if you want, the democratic ideology, we are up there religiously holding elections. But like you rightly said, the ruling party has been in power since we started doing elections in 1980. And I'm going to look at the pattern briefly. In 1980, we are coming from a liberation war, which obviously was protracted and had blood, and there were sanctions from 1965, 1966 because of the UDI, and we had the politics of the time leading into Zimbabwe Rhodesia in the 1978-79 and into Zimbabwe in 1980. So when we went to those elections, the winners were people coming from the liberation war. So Zimbabwe, in that regard, is founded as a country that was founded on blood, and it is founded on an armed struggle. There are 16 countries in Southern Africa, and this is very important. These countries are in SADC, which is the Southern African Development Community, as we know it, which used to be SADC with a double D. Now, these countries are Angola, Namibia, Zambia, Mozambique, Tanzania, Democratic Republic of Congo, Seychelles, Madagascar, Mauritius, Namibia, Botswana, Eswatini, Comoros, Lesotho. So, out of the 16 countries, you got 5 countries that share the same birth, the same foundation with Zimbabwe. And this is Namibia, Angola, Mozambique, Zimbabwe, and South Africa. Then you have the islands, the Comoros, the Seychelles, Madagascar, Mauritius, with the French-English background and negotiated internal settlements, smooth transfer of power to the indigenous people of those islands. Then you got Congo with the abortion of the liberation movement, Patrice Lumumba, and the chaos that followed after Mobutu Sese Seko took over, and that has never stopped until then. Then you have Julius Nyerere in Tanzania, and then you have Samora Machel in Mozambique, big stalwarts, and you got the history of Angola with Neto to begin with, and we know what happened when his successor came after he died after 2 years. And you have Namibia with Dr. Nyoma there. So, this is very important, that history. You got the 5 countries based on the liberation movement. Then you have the protectorates. Zambia, Malawi, Botswana, and how they got the independence. Now, when you look at that, you are looking at the politics of the region. So, of the 5 countries founded on the liberation movements, your South Africa, your Namibia, your Mozambique, your Angola, and Zimbabwe, Namibia, these are still intact, all the 5 liberation movement, and they have a solidarity. And this is not starting because they got independence. It started during the fighting.
And all of them are still in power.
All of them are still in power. And during the fighting, when South Africa was fighting for independence, there were people like Dr. Kenneth Kaunda, born of a Presbyterian father, Robert Mugabe of a Catholic background, and he was considered by the Western Bloc as a moderate who preferred multiracialism, and who also was a peaceful man, according to the West during that time. So when we had the frontline state, Dr. Kaunda was betrayed by John Vorster when he secretly met John Vorster. And John Vorster, he was trying to say, let's do the Ditende. Everybody, when we were growing up in the war, Ditende was considered a term of, secret. If somebody backstabs you by organizing something secret, became Ditende. It became a derogatory term. But what Ditende was he was trying to talk to say, when Mozambique is fighting, Angola is fighting, can we stop the fighting and talk? And can you give these people independence the way you gave the independence to the protectorates, to Zambia, to Malawi? And I, on my part, will go and stop the military solution. So that got him in trouble with countries like Zimbabwe. Because anyone that seemed to fight the military solution at the time, for Zimbabwe, it was really internal settlement versus confrontation. And the people had come in 1963. They had come to a point, Joshua Nkomo, Robert Mugabe, they had to come to a point that they realized that you cannot negotiate with Ian Smith. Then you got your Chikeremas and your Mzorewas and the people that were inside. Dabaningi story, they all had they were part of ZANU-PF. They had agreed that confrontation was the key. You can see the videos of Dabaningi story as the leader of ZANU. Herbert Stepo in Zambia itself, sitting in a hard place where Kaunda was saying, you guys and you're fighting, that's not necessary. You don't have to shed blood. So he became like an enemy of Zimbabwe, talking to South Africans. South Africans, we were colonizing Namibia.
That is Kenneth Kaunda.
That is Kenneth Kaunda. So Kenneth Kaunda in Zambia, he rose for 27 years. When an opposition similar to ZANU-PF rose in Zambia, the only difference between Kenneth Kaunda and Julius Nyerere and Robert Mugabe and Machel, right, and the president of Angola was that Kenneth Kaunda did not have war veterans.
Okay.
Because there was no war in Zambia.
Okay.
So his institutions, or the dictatorship that he was accused of, was mainly the intelligence organization, his boys. But he had no institutions to support him, unlike the liberation movement. The same goes for Dr. Hastings Kamuzu Banda in Malawi. He was the openly anti-communist Western ally who opposed communist state socialism, and Malawi was purely capitalist. And he is the only one that traded with South Africa openly, defying UN sanctions against South Africa. He's the only one that kept an embassy in South Africa when everybody was running away from apartheid South Africa.
So in other words, you are saying that is the reason why the ruling parties in Malawi and in Zambia failed to the opposition that emerged after independence.
So these people never enjoyed genuine solidarity with the liberation movement countries. So when they were in trouble politically, Zimbabwe just watched Kaunda fall. They watched Kamuzu Banda fall. There was no bond. When Mugabe faced similar opposition in 2008, South Africa did not watch. Namibia did not watch. Angola did not watch. Mozambique did not watch and fold their hands.
Now, listen, if you may give us your opinion here, how does this history, the history of SADC, of the liberation movements in SADC, impact in this election, election today?
This is where we are coming from. So, as a liberation movement, just like ANC, just like SWAPO is doing right now, you got the period of 1980 to 1996, where we had formal elections that were very predictable. You did not need a degree in political science to predict the 1985 election, the 1990, even with Zoom. There was no point. It was very clear that the ruling party, ZANU-PF, had this covered and they were winning the elections. This is the period that the ANC is enjoying today. This is the period that SWAPO is enjoying. Now we come to probably the ANC will be talking of EFF coming up. We had our 1999 uprising, where because of what happened in the 90s economically and the disenfranchisement of young people, it started with the National Constitutional Assembly pushing for certain reforms in our constitution, and that transformed into the MDC. In the 1998 riots, which were led by the ZCTU. So ZCTU, together with the civic society, which formed the National Constitutional Assembly, and together with, so we have the civil society, ZCTU, and the Constitutional Assembly itself, after it was formed, they come together to come up with the MDC.
Okay.
When that happened, that was the real threat that came to ZANU-PF. So I will start with the 2000 election.
Okay.
Near miss, because we had parliamentary elections. We still, from 1995, we had the executive presidency after the Unity Accord in 1997. So we moved in to say, okay, we are going to vote for the president. The president will have 6 terms and the parliament will have 5 terms. That's why we moved from 1990 elections. Our parliamentary elections came in 1995 because we had a new constitution and the president had to be voted for separately in 1996. And then that pushed us to 2000. We had another parliamentary election. And this was a near miss because we had 120 seats and whoever wins parliament would become the majority ruler, but depending on who then becomes the president the following year. And this 6-month-old party, which was only 6 months old when we had our election in 2000, got 57 seats. And
which was a shock.
And ZANU-PF got 62 seats. So apart before that, they had actually had an election victory when they voted for a no vote for a constitution that in a referendum in February. And in February, they were only 3 months old when they managed to shock the government by winning a no vote in the referendum. So that rise in a political wave of young people coming up to try and wrestle power from the ruling party, so to speak, did happen. And obviously, going into the 2002 elections, ZANU-PF had to re-strategize. And this whole idea of who is this party came into play. And that's when the image of puppetry and puppet politics and the West in America and the UK funding the MDC came into play. Creating a solidarity between the 5 liberation movements in the country leading into 2002. So we know what happened. ZANU-PF had to repackage itself. The ANC was talking about compulsory acquisition of land. ZANU-PF had just after independence, 1980, people invaded farms and they were arrested. In 1997, the Sose people invaded farms and they got arrested. So when we were fighting the liberation war, it was clear that after the war, we would go into the farms and take our land. And people who tried to do that because of reconciliation were shocked because they got arrested. So ZANU-PF went for reconciliation and went for the, willing buyer, willing seller policy instead of the radical approach of taking the land, up until the MDC was formed. And the MDC was actually pushing in 1997 through the National Constitutional Assembly for compulsory acquisition of land and against the willing buyer, willing seller. So ZANU-PF realized that's the electoral trump card. And we know what happened with the land reclamation program starting after the election, the parliamentary election in 2000. So when that happened, a new radicalism came, and the land became the agenda-setting topic.
Now, that's quite interesting. Very, very interesting. Really, the relationship between the liberation movements, right, and the influence that they have on the Zimbabwean political landscape. Now, if we look further forward and look at probably this particular election, what factors do you see?
Good question.
Affecting, determining, deciding this election? What factors are going to decide this election?
Good question. So, what did we see after 2000? This is my question.
Yes.
We have an election coming in 2005.
Yes.
The opposition was neutralized.
All right.
Neutralized, and it had already divided into two over a constitutional amendment that was introduced by ZANU-PF in terms of the Senate and bringing back the Senate, and then Morgan Tsvangirai falling out with his colleagues, and the opposition went into two forms. And it was a landslide for ZANU-PF in 2005.
Yeah.
And we are moving to the next election. ZANU-PF knows that after 2005, the election is 2010. And they deliberately push it forward to 2008 and cut the parliamentary term by 5 years because they realize that it's not going to be viable for Tsvangirai and Robert Mugabe to run an election on their own, given the popularity of Tsvangirai. So they cut the parliamentary and come up with harmonized election so that the president can benefit from the campaign that will be the campaign machinery of the party when they are doing the MPs. And the opposition was not in any position to oppose that because they had lost the 2005 election. They had no constitutional power to block anything in parliament. So we have the harmonized elections, which again shocked ZANU-PF. So Tsvangirai defeats Mugabe in that election.
Yes.
And there's internal fighting in ZANU-PF. What did we see after that? And I'm coming to your question. We had the government of national unity. The opposition were enjoying and celebrating their new experience in government. And they did not even want a change. When we came to 2013, ZANU-PF had to pat them on the shoulder and say, hey, it's 5 years.
Let's go for election.
And they said no. let's keep this for indefinite until Julius Mawarire, hired or not hired, we don't know how he came up with his constitutional court case. But we know as a citizen, he went and said he had a right to vote for a new government. Some people say he was sponsored by ZANU-PF, some people said he uses his resources. That's neither here nor there. But he put up his case to try and drag the opposition into an election. And they just wanted to go forever with a unity government. Say, this looks like working, the US dollar is working, the economy is working. Why don't we just keep going? And ZANU-PF knew they were ready. And the opposition was not ready. So the court orders an election, which was a total landslide. I come from Masingo. Masingo had 1 seat to ZANU-PF. The whole in 2008, 25 went to the MDC. They did not get a single one in 2013. 26 out of 26, every single one, including Masingo Eben, which had been an MDC seat for since 2000. It went to ZANU-PF. So that shock again to see, okay, and then 2013, ZANU-PF has a landslide. And then we have the politics of 2017. And we have a transition. Is Zimbabwe ready for change of leadership? Mm-hmm. Well, we saw a change of leadership, but not between the parties, but within a party. Okay. So ZANU-PF has a new leader via what happened with the military involvement and everything. And 2018, we see the pattern again from a Robert Mugabe was 64-65%, way below his party as well, which had more than 2/3, 78-79% in terms of what happened in 2013. Now we come to 2018. We got a big delay because the election cannot even be announced. And then we have a 0.6% crossover for Emmerson Mnangagwa. That means we are coming back to what the MDC was, very, very close to getting power in the presidency. Where they were in 2000, where they were in 2008, is where they were in 2018. And what do you think ZANU-PF did after the 2018 shock? After the delay in the announcement of Mnangagwa's results, what do you think they did? Which is different from what they did after the shock of 2008. Obviously, they strategized to make sure this doesn't happen. So this is, to me, is not looking like good news. After the 2018, it's just like 2008. Okay. So ZANU-PF has done its homework in terms of mobilization structure. So the democracy we're talking about in Zimbabwe is who has got the capacity to mobilize the vote. And you're talking of the rural institutions, your chiefs, your sabuks, and your councillors, and the cell structures of the party itself. That's from the rural vote. Then you are talking of delimitation. We saw the delimitation process and the kind of how the parliament is going to be shaped, which strongholds got the most seats. It's all part of the game. And what happens to the highly dense, popular, high population density areas like Harare, like Bulawayo? How many seats do they get? Is it proportional to the millions that stay in the country? No. So the seats are fewer there, and they obviously more in other strongholds. So it's all part of the game. I'm talking of what happened between 2018 and now. You got a delimitation process. Mm-hmm. Then you got the voter registration process itself. Who registered to vote and how? Who walked out of their house to the registration because they just wanted to vote? And who voted because they were made to register by somebody who controls their vote because they actually made them to register? This is where you're looking at. So then you're looking at institutions. Mm-hmm. Democratic institutions, ZEC, the media, mm-hmm. and that is the public media, the judiciary, and the military security sector. All right, yeah. Just to add there before, so that you can answer, at once. Now, if we look at the democratic institutions that we have in the country, as we look at this election, could we be heading for another disputed election? Well, you're talking of independence of these accountability institutions, right? Yes. And this is what we are looking at. I don't believe for once there is any manipulation of the counting process of votes. Vote manipulation in our current setup is happening because of how much independence these institutions have. Right. So if these institutions cannot cry foul, just talk about fair media representation and coverage. If the institutions cannot call out to say, well, the competition is not fair or is one-sided, you already have a problem there, because one party is going to enjoy 90%, 99% of the media space, and no one is going to say anything about it, right? And if one institution is going to do what would constitutionally constitute a vote buying, you're going to use state resources and attribute a name of a political candidate to those resources. In any democratic institution, we are copying Western democracy. You can not possibly imagine a running incumbent president in the United States taking treasury money and saying it's my personal money.
And use it for campaigning purposes.
Not only that, but tell the voters that it's me, it's not the government doing this.
Okay.
And nobody says anything. You cannot take government money and say, this is actually me, not the party, not the government, because you want votes. That's constitutes vote buying. But those things happen, and they do happen across Africa. And they go unchecked when they happen. And those that are outside power, when they get power, unfortunately, in the few countries that we have had transitions, even in Zambia that I was talking about and other countries, they actually prefer to use the same machinery to retain power.
Now, reason, as we look at those democratic institutions in the country, and if we look at this particular election, in the event that, say, Nelson Chamisa emerges the winner, do you see these democratic institutions facilitating a smooth transition? And also, do you see the ruling party and the incumbent president facilitating a smooth transition of power? It takes us again to our theme when we said, is Zimbabwe ready for change of leadership?
If an election result was announced where the declared winner is Nelson Chamisa, I see it happening. What I do not see happening is how we could possibly get to an election result that is announced that way. So ZANU-PF is not going to organize an election that takes it outside power. They are not going to democratize themselves out of power. They will democratize themselves to maintain power, not to lose it. So as long as democracy is in the custody of the ruling party, and they are the custodians of these institutions, they will not be foolish enough to democratize themselves out of power. That is not going to happen. So what I'm saying now is we are going to an election that is institutionally predetermined because of the compromised independence of the democratic institutions. So again, I talk of the history of Southern Africa, and I'm saying, when you look at South Africa, when you look at Namibia, when you look at Angola, when you look at Mozambique, these are the war countries. Even when we went to the DRC, none of these other protectorate countries took part in the Five Nation War. It was Zimbabwe, Angola, and Namibia, together with DRC versus Rwanda and Uganda and the rebels. So it's people with a military background that realize, okay, this is what is happening. Other people folded their hands and watched the 4-year, 5-year war. They just watched. Zambia, they were there. Even Nelson Mandela, he did not take part. He supplied weapons to all the parties that were fighting there. We know what the politics of the time. But what I'm just saying is Zimbabwe going to be the first liberation movement to die? People talk of Zambia and the HH and all these examples they give. This is a totally different context. Kaunda fell because Robert Mugabe was asked after Kaunda, are you going to go the Kaunda way? He laughed and he said, I will go the Mugabe way.
Okay.
I'm not going the Kaunda way, because he knew that Kaunda doesn't have any institutions. When things got bad in 27, they just watched him fall. He had no war veterans. He just had his intelligence guys, a handful of people that were taking people to the chambers and stuff like that. When the real wave came, he couldn't sustain it.
So in other words,
So right now, the question is, which of the 5 liberation movements that are still intact, these are the frontline states we're talking of, that are still intact in Namibia, is going to fall first? Zimbabwe? Does it look likely like ANC in South Africa will fall first? Or SWAPO in Namibia will fall first? Frelimo, after the death of Lakama, it looked the most fragile for all these years. Frelimo looked like they had the biggest challenge in Lakama. Initially, it was obviously Savimbi, and MPLA looked like they were the most vulnerable. When Savimbi died, it transferred to Mozambique, those Portuguese colonies. And when Dhlakama died, Frelimo is getting stronger. The elections in Mozambique now are a formality. At a point, Frelimo was the MDC of Mozambique. They controlled almost half the parliament. But now, I'm talking of not Renamo, was like the MDC. And Frelimo now has regained, it's going back into the strongholds of Renamo because Dhlakama died. The same thing that has happened, okay, we have Tsvangirai dying and Chamisa is coming up. Now, the question is, 2023, do we see ZANU-PF making history as the first liberation movement to get out of power? I don't see it happening in 2023. This is coming to your question. I see it happening in the future.
Okay.
I see it happening in the future, some generations to come.
Okay.
One day, South Africa, ANC might not be the ruling party. When maybe Malema has built that institution to a point where they can get the vote.
So to make it clear, in this particular election, the way you see it, it's very difficult.
It is very, very difficult. Miracles do happen, and they are called miracles because they are against logic and they are against any form of political analysis. If you're using analytical tools to analyze, there's just no point thinking that there will be a change of government this week in Zimbabwe. There's no point thinking like that. But unless we're talking of some kind of miracle that will happen. But again, you are coming to a point where we're saying, okay, when Thabo Mbeki, during the most fragile moment for ZANU-PF in 2008, said there was no crisis, what was he talking about? And people were angry with him. He was talking about this solidarity
between liberation war.
Yes, I had personal experience here in Australia because timbers were very high, and I was a columnist in a state paper, and I had repercussions here when Morgan Tsvangirai appeared bandaged. A lot of things happened at the time when it appeared bandaged in 2007 April with Maduku and other people after being bashed in Highfields. Right. And the turmoil, the outcry was so loud. This is unacceptable. The statement that Mugabe issued after that. If the police say disperse and you don't, they said Uno Dashurwa. That's the statement that came after the bashing, that you get bashed. It's normal. The police say move, you don't move. It doesn't matter. You lead a party, you get bashed. The Western countries were angry. Everybody was out. Human rights violations. So we went to Dar. What happens in Dar es Salaam? What did Sadiq do? Robert Mugabe literally walks out of the meeting with a spring in his foot. They say they don't read much in the wounds. The problems of Zimbabwe are deeper than that. Sadiq says they are not worried about the wounds on Tsvangirai's face at all. And this is the trump card that people are thinking that an opposition leader is bashed. This is going to bring him down. All these countries will say we condemn this. They say, wait, that's just minor. We are not worried about bruises here. We are worried about the real issue, the sanctions, the land, and he prepares his defense and the defense is adopted. So this is what we are talking about when people think, this is going to happen. What has the MDC or the Triple C right now? The Triple C, what have they done? to build diplomatic relations with these stakeholders in Southern African politics. Tsvangirai did it. Who did he win? The protectorates. He won Kienkama in Botswana. He won Mwanawasa in Zambia. The people who do not really matter in SADC, when you see what happens when SADC sits, SADC is like the UN Security Council. The 5 countries I mentioned, they are the de facto veto power. If Zimbabwe, Angola, Mozambique, South Africa, and Namibia say no, the rest of the 16 will just, it can't pass. So they are the foundation of that movement because they shed the blood. So when you go to look for allies and you get Mwanawasa in Zambia, and Mwanawasa tries to tell liberation movements to get Tsvangirai in, what do you think liberation movements would say? To say, you are from Zambia, you did detend during the war, you were talking to Foster, now you're telling this puppet of the West that we should accept you. This is what happens. So you really need to win these guys. I'm waiting for the day when Mozambique, when Angola, when Namibia will be talking to an opposition in Zimbabwe and saying face to face to the ruling party in Zimbabwe, no, we need to be fair. You are all Zimbabwe. That's the day we're waiting for.
But at the moment,
and I'm thinking
it doesn't look feasible.
It doesn't look like that's where we are in terms of the growth of politics in Southern Africa.
So I was going to ask, as we draw towards our conclusion, if I were to ask you to make a prediction, whom do you think is going to emerge the winner?
There's 2 ways to look at it. From just a vote mobilization analysis point of view, I think Emerson Mnangagwa has invested a lot. Some people like Jonathan Moyo have said he's unelectable and so on. Really, realistically, he is coming from a very, very difficult position. He doesn't have the charisma, he doesn't have the outlook, he doesn't have the oratory skills, he doesn't even have the policy depth in terms of articulating public policy. He is not one of those leaders that would impress you in terms of how he articulates his public policy. All he has is the power in his hands and the economic wheels that are turning in terms of some aspects of development. But just from a PR point of view, he is very weak. But I think he has realized that weakness. And because he has realized that weakness, he has tried to deliberately mobilize the vote in the churches, deliberately do programs for the young people, and somehow the patronage system is also getting all the elites and the business people to his side. And obviously, he has adopted the traditional ZANU-PF structures to mobilize the rural vote. So he has done a lot of work. Nelson Chamisa, to me, he hasn't departed from the rally politics. That's all he does, which is he did in 2018. Go to the rallies and talk. Go to the rallies and
fill up the stadium.
Yeah, fill up the stadium, excite people, and talk and talk and talk. But beyond that, he has not done much. The same vote that he got will be the same vote that he will get. You are looking at the mobilization structure and who registered and all those kind of things. You are looking at how many seats they already gave to ZANU-PF in terms of local government councils and the impact of that in terms of the psyche of the voters when you give more than 100 seats away because you can't raise the candidates. So I'm talking of council elections here. And I just don't think they have the organizational machinery to face ZANU-PF at the moment, given ZANU-PF is going to perform better in their parliament than they will do with President Mnangagwa. Ordinarily, he would lose to someone like Nelson Chamisa. But just from an organizational point of view, I think they've done enough to make sure that they do not lose the election.
Interesting. Now, do you see, our last question, do you see any chance of maybe a government of national unity, maybe in the case of a deadlock?
What Mnangagwa is doing is very, very simple. He is not going to have a government of national unity. He is going to try and absorb as many of the influential people from the opposition as possible. You saw the former ambassador to Australia being paraded just a few days ago, a day or two ago, crossing the floor at State House. And she's not the first one. You got Maridadi as an ambassador, Trude died an ambassador. So this is what he's going to do, pluck out people that he thinks, so that the public perception would be that the opposition is dying. So I see a few people, and they already know that's what he does. So after the election, few people will just pretend to be angry with Chamisa, and they will go there to the State House, and Mnangagwa with his wife will go and they have a photo shoot with them and say they crossed the floor, then they send to one country or the other, they read this commission or the other, or they just pressed in the Public Service Commission. This is what it's going to do to try and neutralize the opposition. Try to divide it by just buying those he can. I do not see any formal government coming through.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Oh, there we are. Quite thought-provoking discussion. Our viewers, in case neither candidate attains or gets the 50+1% required to be president, the two leading candidates will again square off after 6 weeks. That is on the 2nd of October in the presidential runoff. That will be my last question, Reason. Do you see any chance of a runoff, or will you see an outright winner?
You see, the runoff we had in 2008 just became a runaway because Morgan Tsvangirai had to flee the country, and the 85% that came out of it was just a formality. I do not see that possible to repeat. So, and I think that those in the power corridors of ZANU-PF know that the last thing they want is a runoff, because if we had an election, which is exactly why in the first place, when Tsvangirai came on the picture, that's why we changed the constitution to the harmonized election in 2008 to begin with. First of all, to make it possible for Mugabe to extend his terms of office, but also to make sure that we don't have that situation where we have a one-on-one run of the president when nothing else is happening. I think that would be harder for Emerson Mnangagwa than the harmonized election, where we do it together with the councillors and the MPs and the senators. So if that were to happen, it would be to the advantage of Nelson Chamisa, and they know it. So I do not think the system, the electoral system in Zimbabwe now, is designed for a runoff, for another runoff. If it happens, that would be Chamisa's best ever chance to win the election, because one-on-one, those people who will be crossing the floor because they voted wrongly, they are likely to go to his side. That is my opinion, but I just do not see it happening.
Very interesting. Well, there we are. I just want to thank Reason. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Harry,
for coming to the program and giving us some insightful opinions. Now, to our viewers, what do you think about this election? Do you think Zimbabwe is ready for change of leadership? Whom do you see as the emerging winner in this particular election? Or do you think we're going to have a government of national unity? Do you think we're going to have a presidential runoff? What is your thought? Yes, we want to know what you think about this election. Yes, don't forget to like our page, follow us on Twitter, on Facebook, and on Instagram, as well as on YouTube. This is your program where we give you the chance to interact with us. Tell us what you think. Kwelu Classics, your story, our story. We'll be giving you more election updates as we proceed. Thank you.
Thank you.